China, and also development of a roadmap towards China 6, so a development of a movement towards the most stringent standards that we'll see anywhere in the world, possibly by 2020, although that's something that we can debate today as the sessions roll through. Looking at today's programme, we'll start, I'll give a presentation on the global perspective of emissions legislation and also what's been happening in China recently. We'll then look at this development towards China 6 and then the technical challenges that OEMs face in order to meet it. We'll look at testing and how that can be made more accurate and effective in the real world. And then finally, we'll look at advanced technologies for achieving emission standards both here in China and elsewhere. So I'm just going to kick off the presentations today with an overview of developments in the global and regional emissions regulations, and also talk to you about what's happening in China specifically, and how that's impacting on the truck market and the bus market here. So looking at an agenda for my presentation today, like I said, part 1 will be on the global perspective and part 2 on China. Just wanted to give you an overview of how we see emissions legislation and regulations and what we see the purpose of them as in terms of the progress we're trying to make. So really we divide them up into 2 parts. One is on the atmospheric, or the public health and environment side. So the dangerous pollutants that you have that affect human health on a daily basis, particulate matter, hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and nitrous oxide. And then on the other hand, we have the greenhouse gases and fuel economy issues around CO2, which influence climate change or a much more macro trend and longer term. So as the title of this slide suggests, the focus really in recent years, mainly talking here in North America and Europe, has shifted away somewhat from the public health and environment issues, because we've had Euro 6 and EPA 10 come in, and these are highly stringent standards, and towards the climate change agenda and improving fuel economy and greenhouse gas emissions. We have phase 2 of the greenhouse gas and fuel economy legislation coming in the States in a couple of years, and really that's where the progress can be made in developed economies in the coming years, given where we are on the public health side. But that's not the case really in the developing world. There's still a long way to go in terms of where we can improve in the developing world. And this slide just points out how far we've come really in terms of the standards from Euro 2 in 1996 down to Euro 6 and EPA 10 in the last few years. Now these standards, Euro 6 and EPA 10, have become the benchmark in terms of emissions legislation worldwide, and virtually all emissions regulation in other countries is based on these 2 standards, either directly or drawing a strong influence from them. And just to summarise in one neatish table where we are in terms of a broad sample of countries, and the reason we've chosen these various countries is they represent various points in economic development, various sizes, various different characteristics in the truck markets. But as you can see, we've had, as we've stated, EPA 10 since 2010, as you would imagine, and Euro 6 since 2013, broadly equivalent standards, as we showed in the last slide. In Japan, those standards have been in place since 2016. We'll dig into Japan in a little bit more detail shortly. In South Korea, again, since 2015. In Turkey, since 2015. In Hong Kong, it's proposed to come on in this year. In Singapore, proposed to come on in 2018. In Mexico, also proposed to come on in 2018. Brazil, proposed again 2019. We've seen a lot of difficulties with existing standards in Brazil, however. In India, well, they'll look to skip Euro 5 equivalent altogether and move to a Bharat 6 or a Euro 6 equivalent by 2021. Again, lots of challenges for India, but we'll dig into that in more detail as well. And as you just go through the list, you can see that looking at the dark green is the most advanced standard we have. The beigey colour is Euro 5 equivalent. And as you get lighter, the further back you go in terms of standards. But you see that, broadly speaking, countries are moving in a strong direction towards the more advanced standards. Here in places such as Colombia and so on, we're hearing a progress towards greater legislative stringency. And in China, which is really the big market, the one that will change significantly in terms of SCR and so on, that's the one to watch out for. We take a relatively conservative view on China. I know that there's discussions going on for the introduction of China 6 by 2020. I mean, again, we'll dig into that in more detail during the day. But we take a relatively conservative view on China. Just picking out 3 Asian economies before we move to China. Looking at Japan. In the last 10 years, we've moved from an equivalent of a Euro 4 to now to a Euro 6 or EPA 10 standard from 2016. We had the declaration of a new long-term, a post-new long-term, and a post-new long-term, which is the equivalent of EPA 10 or China 6, Euro 6, which was introduced last year, in fact. In India, which is another one of these economies such as China, which has the potential, because of the size of the truck market, to really shift things in terms of technology and so on. We've seen the proposal of Bharat 6, so a Euro 6 equivalent by 2020, nationwide that is. We see significant challenges for India in terms of fuel quality and also enforcement, probably more importantly as well. And we think that it will be a struggle to implement that standard throughout the country. Probably in Delhi and other major cities, Mumbai and so on, it will be more effective. But we take, again, a relatively conservative view on India. Like I said, because of the fuel quality issues and also for enforcement. South Korea has had a Euro 6 equivalent for heavy-duty vehicles since 2015. Reasonably well enforced. We hear of cheating on standards in the range of around 20% of the total market in South Korea, which is equivalent to, say, Mexico or slightly better than Brazil. But the rollout has been relatively effective and relatively well enforced. So looking at China in more detail now. Just as a bit of background, there's a lot of text on this slide, which you can read maybe later in the slide pack. But really just to point out that in China, we've seen a dual-stage development of emissions regulations throughout the last 10 years. And it's really concentrated on this East Coast region where the most harmful effects of pollutants are felt. So if you look at the 3 charts on the bottom, we have particulate matter in the first 2 and nitrous dioxide in the third. And you can see that the most dire situation, if you want to put it that way, is on the East Coast in the 11 major municipalities and industrial zones. And that's where we've seen the rollout of standards most quickly. So in China, as with elsewhere in the world, standards are based on the Euro standards. We've seen China 4 in implementation nationwide since 2015. And like I said, we expect to see China 5 from the middle of this year, July 2017. Looking at how that's developed across the country, so as I said, standards have been introduced in a staggered way, with standards coming on faster in the major cities. So Beijing saw China 4 since 2009, Guangdong from 2010, Shanghai from 2010 as well. And all 3 of those have seen China 5 implemented from 2016. Again, as with India, you have an issue with the quality of fuel in China outside of the major cities and enforcement. But within those major cities, enforcement and fuel supply are relatively strong, and the implementation of standards has been easier. Looking at light-duty vehicles as well, from a diesel point of view, it's less of an issue in China because there's so few, mainly imports, and most passenger cars and light-duty vehicles are gasoline engines. But again, you've seen the rollout of China 5, equivalent of Euros 5 legislation from 2018. Now, like I said, we see certain barriers to the advancement of standards in China. And the three that we point to most strongly are, again, the quality of fuel, the availability of low sulfur fuel, bureaucracy in terms of the enforcement of standards, and finally technological challenges in terms of the availability of SCR technology and so on. That really is a lesser concern compared to the first two, however. Looking at what this means in terms of the choices that OEMs are going to make in terms of implementation and achieving these standards, well, really, to achieve Euro 6 or China 6 equivalent, SCR with a DPF has become the technology of choice. That's the case in North America, it's the case in Europe, and it's been the case in South Korea and elsewhere. The calibration of that system was really contingent on the availability of urea supply within each country. So if you take somewhere like South Korea, they have no domestic urea supply. They've tended towards favouring a heavier reliance on EGR, but with an SCR system as well. In China, where you have ample supply, if not oversupply, of urea for AdBlue production, the system can be geared more highly towards SCR, and you see higher AdBlue dosing rates because the increase in AdBlue cost of running is more than offset by the better fuel economy. If you look at the Chinese market as well, the Chinese truck market is dominated by 6 major OEMs who have around 80% of the market. A few things to point out on this. You saw a sharp drop-off in vehicle sales in 2015. This has recovered somewhat in 2016 as we had several years of strong sales, and the fleet was relatively new, and a slowdown in the economy saw vehicle sales drop off. But in 2016, this has picked up again. But just point out that you have these 6 companies that dominate the market, and in this slide, what we do is we've surveyed all of those 6 and examined their strategies for meeting China 4 to China 6 standards, and all of them rely very heavily on SCR, either solely or with an EGR. But if you were to look at even the European OEMs, you'd see a much higher reliance on EGR in their systems, and it shows you how far into their plans SCR is for the major OEMs in China. What does all this mean then for the China vehicle market and SCR technology? Where will we be in the future? Well, like I said, in 2015 we had a drop-off in the market. We don't show 2014 in this one, but as you saw, it was around 800,000 truck sales in 2014. It fell in 2015 for the reasons I've explained. In 2016, that's an actual number, so we saw a significant recovery in the market in 2016, and we expect this to continue over time. For our vehicle sales forecast, we work with a company called LMC. It's a specialist economic and automotive forecaster, and these numbers have proved for 2016 their forecast was pretty much on the money, and we're confident in the figures looking forward. We expect to see that as the Chinese economy expands with the various government initiatives that are coming online, we expect to see the truck market increase and the truck and bus market combined to reach about 1.3 million units by 2020. In terms of SCR, well, like I said, we're seeing China 5 come on strongly in 2017. The impact of that, we'll see an uptick in SCR vehicle sales in 2018, we expect, and an acceleration thereafter. We expect to see around 900,000 units of SCR buses and trucks being sold by 2021. Finally, what does this mean for the fleet? Well, we expect China to have the largest SCR vehicle fleet in the world by 2021, or or 2022 in fact, overtaking North America and Europe by that stage. Just for reference, the European EU28 plus EFTA and North American markets are around 4 to 4.5 million trucks on the road in terms of the fleet, and we expect in total that is, and we expect the SCR fleet in China to overtake that by 2022. So just to draw this all together, hopefully it's given you a flavour of where the market is globally in terms of the development of standards. And as I said, the adoption of Euro and EPA standards across countries has become the norms in terms of development of emissions regulation. And technology is proven and in place to meet these standards, as we've seen in North America and Europe. The availability of low sulfur fuel remains a major obstacle in the progress in to meeting these standards in many developing economies, however, and enforcement also remains a significant issue in many economies. In China, progress towards China 5 has been faster than we expected, even from this time last year. We released a China study in I think it was May of this year, May of last year, and we were surprised by the speed of the development of standards in China. And we expect the standards to be introduced nationwide by July 2017. And as a result of that, we expect China to have the largest SCR fleet in the world, owing to its much larger truck market in 2022. And one final point I've missed off there is as well that we're seeing a roadmap towards a China 6 equivalent, or Euro 6 equivalent in China by 2020 is on the cards. But again, like I said, we take a relatively conservative view to how likely this is. So for the time being, that's my introduction to the conference. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and if not, then we can move on with today's proceedings. So any questions at all? No? Well, in that case, we'll move on to our first presentation, and that is from Michael Walsh, who's the founding chairman and special advisor on the International Council on Clean Transportation. Mr. Walsh is a mechanical engineer who spent his entire career working on motor vehicle pollution control issues at a local, national and international level. He's been an independent consultant advising governments and industries around the world. He has served as co-chairman of the EPA's Mobile Sources Technical Advisory Subcommittee for 12 years and is active